When I was 3 years old, I spoke what to me was a very simple and honest truth, that despite being housed in the body of a female, I was really a boy. Now, I made this announcement in early 1960s rural Indiana to a large group of my grandmother's friends. In retrospect, maybe that wasn't the best way to have gone about it. Shortly thereafter, my mother let me know that if I didn't stop saying this, some pretty unpleasant things were going to happen to me. Looking back on that experience, I can see a couple of things that I took away. And the first was a belief that there was something intrinsically wrong with me. Because even at that young age, I understood that if it really wasn't okay to have these feelings, then there was something very not okay with me. And second was an understanding that this was not an okay thing to talk about, even to myself. So I went into a very deep, dark state of denial. Now fast forward to age 40. One evening, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, tying my shoes, when seemingly out of nowhere, this voice in my head said, "I don't feel like a woman." And in that instant, this fortress of denial that I had built and worked to maintain for over 35 years came crashing to the ground. I was flooded with memories from both childhood and adulthood, of being teased and talked about and shamed. Because even though I had stopped saying the words, "I'm really a boy," people knew I was different, and they've always treated me like I was different. So in a moment's time, I went from sitting on the edge of my bed, minding my own business, tying my shoes, to here, deal with this. It really is not possible for me to adequately articulate just how traumatic that was. At 3 years old, I was told quite explicitly that the world did not have a space for me. There was this unspoken commandment that everyone but me seemed to be in on, that there are two and only two ways to be human, male and female. And with that, boys are supposed to feel and act like boys, and girls are supposed to feel and act like girls. So at the tender age of 3, I began the very long, lonely, and confusing journey of trying to find my way in a world that said that I was not possible. Chaz Bono is a transgender activist and offspring of Sonny and Cher. And he explains it like this: there's a gender in your body and there's a gender in your brain. For most, these things are in alignment. For transgender people, there's a mismatch. That's all it is. It's not complicated, it's not a neurosis, it's just a mix-up. Well, you may be thinking, perhaps there's something strange going on that causes these people to reject what they really are. But biologically, anatomically speaking, men are men and women are women. Well, there's another phenomenon out there in the world known as intersex. And intersex describes those persons born with neither the standard male nor standard female anatomy. These are people who are physically, anatomically ambiguous. They exist somewhere in between, or perhaps beyond male and female. To give you a very brief overview, consider 3 areas of the body that differentiate between male and female: gonads, genitals, and chromosomes. Let's start with gonads. Don't you just love conversations that start like that? Typically, men have testicles and women have ovaries. Well, there's another gonad that occurs that's known as an ovotestis. And this is a gonad that contains both ovarian and testicular tissue. Some people have an ovotestis and an ovary. Some have an ovotestis and a testicle. Some have 2 ovotestes. Some people have 1 ovary and 1 testicle. Physical, anatomical ambiguity. Now let's talk about genitals. And I know you like conversations that start like that. Some people are born with ambiguous genitalia. genitals that can't easily or clearly be classified as male or female. At one time, the medical community viewed the birth of such a child to be a social emergency. Just the presence of a newborn child that could not easily and clearly be classified as male or female was so challenging to our expectations that birth was deemed a social emergency. Well, what about chromosomes? That one's pretty easy, right? Men are XY and women are XX. Well, what about someone who's XXY or XYY or XXXY? What about someone who's XY, but all outward appearances are female? Physical, anatomical ambiguity. Some folks with intersex conditions are diagnosed very early in life. Others don't find out until years later. There is often a veil of secrecy and shame that accompanies the experience. A lot of these people are put through some pretty horrific surgeries and medical procedures without their consent, often for the sole purpose of trying to make their bodies conform to the expected male or female variety. It's really pretty unbelievable what a lot of these people have had to endure. It's just not as simple as we've been led to believe, which brings me to perspective shift number 1. 2 are definitely not enough. We as a society have constrained sex and gender to a strict dichotomy, and as a result, a good number of people have been left out. I used to think that I was really different from everyone else. After all, the transgender experience of that part of humanity we call sex and gender is quite a bit different from what most people go through. But as the years have passed, I've been able to step back and look at the big picture. And I now understand that my experience was not really that much different than anyone else's. Who among us has not been told that we are not what we're supposed to be? That there is some abstract image of the perfect human to which we should aspire? How many of you have ever personally struggled with what it means to be a real man or an appropriate woman? Don Miguel Ruiz has said that we humans are the only creatures on the planet who continually punish ourselves for failing to be what we think we should be, and that no one abuses us more than we abuse ourselves. If you can relate to that, then you can relate to my story. And that is key. We humans are a delicious mixture of similarity and difference. We have so much in common. We all know how to love. We all hope and dream. We all know fear, rejection, and disappointment. We all struggle with who we are. And we all yearn for the freedom to simply be ourselves. This brings me to perspective shift number 2. We are more alike than you may have realized. Even though we share so many common experiences and come from such a common base, for some reason we continually choose to obsess upon and harshly judge our differences. Can you imagine a world where instead we chose to embrace both our commonalities and our dissimilarities? What an amazingly wonderful world that would be. But instead, we hold fast to this relentless pursuit of conformity, standardization, and uniformity, ever striving to live up to that abstract notion of perfection, and always failing. I believe that if you and I will take personal responsibility for changing the world, we can usher in a new era and create a world that celebrates the vast diversity of humanity. To do that, it is absolutely essential that we start finding common ground. At first glance, that may seem like an impossibility, especially when you consider those that lie opposite of you on the political, social, or spiritual spectrums. But if you will approach it with an open mind and an open heart, common ground is always possible. Let me give you an example. I tend to have some, shall we say, interesting experiences in public restrooms. Because I have chosen, for a number of reasons, not to physically transition, I use women's facilities. Note that this is in alignment with laws and beliefs that people should use the bathroom that corresponds to the sex they were assigned at birth. Even so, I am regularly challenged by those who feel I'm in the wrong place. This is a regular part of my experience and is always on my mind every time I enter a public restroom. Once, a man actually followed me into a restroom, pounded on my stall door, and yelled, "You're in the women's room." He and I exchanged some rather heated words through that stall door, and eventually he left. What is it that I'm supposed to do? When I go into a public restroom, it's not because I'm trying to make a political statement. I don't know the answer to this problem. We're in a paradigm shift here. But please, try to understand. It's not easy for us either. And yet, even with such a contentious issue, there is common ground because ultimately we all want the same thing. We all just want a safe space to go to the bathroom. This brings me to perspective shift number 3. There is always common ground. And it's worth the effort to find because once we're able to relate to those we view as different, it becomes easier to stop pushing against one another and start finding solutions. Well, you may want to counter. What about people who don't care about common ground? People who aren't interested in finding solutions. People who I believe are trying to take this world in a very dangerous direction. What about them? Well, what about them? Look, all you can do is all you can do. And there are always going to be people out there who see the world differently than you do. No matter who you are, there are going to be people out there who don't like you. Some people may actually hate you, sometimes just for being who and what you are. The key is you don't have to hate them back. Meeting hate with hate never leads to peace and never really solved anything. There are a lot of people out there who believe that I am mentally ill. I've been told I'm possessed by demons. I won't lie. It's painful when I think about how many people out there view me as something deeply flawed or even dangerous over something that I cannot control. And for most of my life, it made me angry, bitter, and resentful. But eventually it all just wore me out. And I got tired of seeing everyone as my enemy. So I made a decision that I was going to learn how to accept people for where they are. It's a process, and some days I'm better at it than others. Perspective shift number 4 comes from Viktor Frankl. He was an early psychiatrist and survivor of the Nazi concentration camps. And he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Simply complaining about things that we can't control really accomplishes nothing. I can't control what other people think of me, but I can work on my response to them. So be just a little bit kinder, just a little bit nicer as you make your way through your day-to-day life. Be willing to learn how to judge less and empathize more. And don't worry about getting it perfect because you aren't going to. Forget perfection. We are always going to have work to do because we are never going to come to a place where there is no room for improvement or growth. It's all part of the human experience. It's all part of our humanity. Kindness is contagious, and your actions have an effect on the world. So learn how to love yourself and be willing to appreciate everyone around you. That's how we change the world. I no longer care what society says because I know there is nothing wrong with me. I also know there is nothing wrong with you. So let's go make a difference. Thank you.